Greetings, folks. Nice to see you today. My name is Dustin Cormier. Welcome to How to Rock Astrology. Today, in this episode, we're going to be talking about what it's like when Pluto is in aspect to Jupiter in your natal chart. First, we're going to hear my little rendition of it, and then eventually we're going to be reading from Pluto, The Evolutionary Journey of the Soul by Jeffrey Wolf Green. I'm going to start this off with my own little take, and then we're going to get to our reading today. I've been excited to do this one because I've been recently reading another very important book, which I'm going to be including in this reading. Now, obviously, this is a Western-rooted video because we're talking about Pluto, which Indian astrology does not traditionally consider. However, I am what we call a tropical Vedic astrologer. I use Vedic philosophy, but I use tropical measurements. So I use the same, I don't go back 24 degrees like you might have heard of some sidereal astrologers. But I digress. I still consider the Vedic precepts to be deeply rich, anciently pervaded material about these symbols that are so relevant to us today through astrology. So I'm going to start this video talking about a bit of a Vedic take on what Jupiter is. I've got a few ideas that I'm excited to unfurl. Essentially, what we're going to be capitalizing is, what we'll capitalize on is the fact that Jupiter relates to the element ether. It embodies the organ of sound. It is the generator of fire, which is Mars and the Sun. It provides, the ether element provides the sustenance for fire. And Jupiter also works in tandem with Mercury to unfold the manifestation of the intuition which Jupiter expresses. So we all in the West, we know that Jupiter is about intuition, the metaphysical sixth sense, the instinctive conceptual understanding of the cosmological laws behind what we understand as the physical laws of the world of Mercury. Now, Jeffrey Wolf Green is going to talk a bit about that eventually, but I wanted to start this off again by getting a bit of an Indian sense of Jupiter. This comes from a beloved book, Graha Sutras by the Planets of Vedic Astrology by Ernst Wilhelm. For anybody in any cultural tradition, I highly recommend this book. This is going to give us a bit of a sense of Jupiter. So there's an old Indian text, a very sacred special text called the Srimad Bhagavatam, which talks about ether in its old Indian way of the five-element system, which the planets fit into at the same time as the four elements. And Jupiter is considered to be ether, and ether is the space in which all creation unfolds. Now we can kind of understand what this means. Ether provides for the space that the other elements in creation requires. I don't want to go too abstract here, but what this is saying, there's a reason why Jupiter is considered to be the guru in astrology. In Indian astrology, Jupiter is the guru. And we know what a guru does, don't we? The guru looks over all the parts of the student's soul and says, hey, you've got too much of this Venus. You've got too much of this passion. You need to take that and extricate it. Suffer for a while. Go into the corner. Do whatever you got to do. Enjoy the Venus inspiration from within your own delicious neurocircuitry. And stop being so attached to getting those passions and pleasures from outside of you. The guru is Jupiter on top of it. Less of that, more, well, Jupiter in that case would be the ideal, but use more of your Jupiter. Be more metaphysically aware. Or if a person has too much Jupiter, which we're going to be talking about today, then you might say, stop being so rigid in your ideas of how you ought to live your life. Be more open. A guru is looking over top of all of what the student's soul is experiencing and expressing, especially if the guru knows that student's astrology chart. And the guru is reaching their hand into the consciousness of this person and gripping this and saying, you have to let go of it, and either the person will struggle until they let go and then they'll just finally exceed, and then the attachment will slowly be broken, or they'll just say, screw you, guru, you suck, I don't want to do this anymore, and then they'll not listen to Jupiter, which happens to all sorts of people. Jupiter is your conception, is an overall picture of your whole chart, your sense of Jupiter and its sound. It's connected with the sound in this way. When you think of ether as the subtlest of these 5 elements, there's ether, fire, earth, air, and water. Ether is the space which contains it all. Now again, Vedic Indian people will understand this, but I want to break down exactly what this means for our experience. What it is that when it's positive, when Jupiter is well placed, which when you have Jupiter and Pluto in aspect to each other, it blisters in extremes of a duality, which is absolute openness. But that absolute openness finds and hits its head against realities that limit it and that cause it to have inspiration and a zealous desire for this freedom. It's ironic. It's looking for a type of freedom. It's the sound. It wants to be open to a trance-like sound of openness and freedom in some direction or another. And it can get attached to one sound as opposed to the sound that it should be looking for. Meaning that Jupiter gets so philosophical about one thing that it attaches it like a dogma, especially with Pluto aspects here. And then they stop listening to other conceptual realities because Pluto adds an emotional security element to this conceiving. It conceives things through an emotionally gripping instinct, which means that whatever that conception is gripped in a rather overemphasized way. So when Jupiter is positive, it can be constant. It will isolate and it will say there is an important purpose, but it's this important purpose and I'm going to apply it openly, but I am going to have stick to something. I'm going to grab some kind of idea, some kind of ideology, some kind of rhythm, some kind of spiritual, religious, metaphysical truth. Any one will do, as long as I get the sound of it, the experience of it. Because it's the sound, the experienced reality of that philosophical view, that religion, that spirituality, that is the manifestation of the truth of that reality for you, for the self. You can't eyeball this. You can't see the truth until you hear it. Metaphysically speaking, on the cosmic spectrum, you have to experience it in the globe-trotting way that we know Sagittarius does. So, a positive Jupiter can grip something, but lightly. In the same way that if you've watched my Pluto and Venus series, Pluto gets obsessed with Venus, and it says, I'm obsessed with being in relationship, which means I can't find happiness within myself, so I need this external relationship. And it burns and it grips that one so deeply that it's based on an emotional impulse, which the other person feels, and then the other person knows that it's not really real, it's just out of your emotional need, and then they break out. And then you say, no, now I'm never going to go into a relationship with anyone else again. And then you just cry and you just isolate yourself and you either kill yourself or you force yourself to get back into relationships again, at which point the evolutionary drama continues. That's Pluto and Venus. Now with Jupiter, replace a person The point of the Pluto and Venus is that you still want to be in relationship. Just don't be so attached passionately to the form that love comes. Just let the love come. And in the same way, replace another person with the Pluto and Venus aspect, replace that with Jupiter, with metaphysical religious forms and ideas. Be with it. Don't obsess to have the one, because knowledge has nothing to do with your emotional security, my friend. I'm sorry to say. There's a reality, there's a conceptual truth that you have to be open to all the time, or else you're going to try and grip on one, and if you have an emotional passion towards gripping that one, you're not going to be open to the real knowledge that is deeper and more intrinsic to your form which you have gripped to. So, Jupiter goes by sound in the experience of an idea. And this is, understand what I mean here. I'm going to bring it all into view right now, okay? Lots of people who get into religion have the Mars zealotry that says, I understand, I have seen what my religion can do, and I'm going to push myself for this. I mean, Mars is its own thing, you know, but Mars goes in the sun, like Mars in particular, is sight. Let me just make sure that I'm correct on that. Manifesting water. Fire is sight. It acquires knowledge from colors and sights. So think about this like in a war. This is how I've wanted to describe this, okay? And imagine the application of someone at war who is a Mars person. Now this is why Mars and Jupiter are best friends, and a Mars emphasized person can do really well with a Jupiter emphasized person in war or in battling and going for any kind of conflict, because Jupiter is kind of like the scout who's on the ground and understanding the reality of the experience of an idea, where Mars sees it, strategizes it, conceptualizes. Mars is a conceptualizer, and it applies itself to what it rationally and logically understands and sees. And it finds opportunities in a different way than Jupiter does. Jupiter is not often necessarily logical. They don't know how they get to where they get. But Mars wants to apply itself to Jupiter's intuition, because as we're going to see, Jupiter, the ether element, feeds the fire element. And when the fire element in Mars is lacking, Jupiter pushes it through with luck and this desire to experience knowledge for itself through sound. Now imagine you're at war, you're a soldier, and you got Jimmy, Jerry, and Joe with you here. You guys are all looking out through your snipers, and you're looking through, and you don't see any enemies. And it doesn't look like there's any gunfire happening. It doesn't look like anything's going on, right? Now a smart soldier might, put a hand out, like all three of you are backed up against a wall, and it doesn't look like there's anyone out there. Now if you were if you were deaf rather, and all three of you are deaf, and you're just trying to understand, that the enemy, so think strategically, Mars knows that this is bunker A and bunker B, and the enemy has a few spots over here, but Mars-wise, Mars knows that there's a flank, a secret flank, where you can go get the enemy this way. Hope this isn't too long-winded, but bear with me, okay? If you were deaf, you might act on the Mars instinct and go for that little roundabout, looking by your eye, not seeing anybody, and just moving along. If Jupiter is there, the sound of rustling enemies, the sound of bullets coming past you will stop you, and you will know through sound the experience of your situation. You're not just looking at the map, you're in the territory, and therefore you have a different experience of what's going on than somebody who would be looking from above. Imagine if you had some kind of omnipresent camera who you can report back to. And the camera says, okay, now you guys need to go in there now. Mars, get in there and do that flank. Jupiter says, sir, we can't. Because I hear enemies who have already gotten to our flank spot. We have to bail. And it's Jupiter. It's this kind of conception and experience of a religion and the openness to the experience of the religion, the sound of it, that gives you the ability to not hold on to a visualized philosophy of it, if that makes sense. And it allows us to see over top everything in ourselves and apply a different self-realization bliss principle than just Mars. Because that's just like the sound of mantras and this ancient thing in India. It's our experience and our mouthing of the mantra, our experience of the knowledge that makes the knowledge special and important to us. And when Pluto gets involved here, we may have a sight, we may have a vision through Mars of what we want to do in our lives. But when someone comes along and tells us something through our ears, we can't just take it wholesale, but we can't deny the possibility of that truth. Now, Pluto is giving us an obsessive emotional control instinct over the things we hear and understand and experience. And this is why Pluto can be such a devastating element when it's involved with Jupiter, is because this stops the guru from getting the deepest experience of life, the truest richness of life that requires the instinct for self-realized experience. And this is the last thing I wanted to show us here before we get into our reading of Jeffrey Wolf Green, is that Jupiter, the ether element, it feeds Mars, the fire element. This is coming from Graha Sutras again. This is a life-promoting cycle where Jupiter feeds Mars. And what Ernst Wilhelm tells us about what this means is that if an element is weak, its life-generating element will be required to compensate for the deficiency. Now, this means this is us relating to if the fire sign is weak, then one is slow to exert themselves if you're living by Mars, because Mars needs a certain amount of logic and rational reason before it can act. And that's how Mars acts at its best. But it will limit itself by only acting on its rational reason unless there is something deeper in the intuition that compels it to expand outside of its limited sense of how to apply its rational reason and logic. So if Mars is weak, then Jupiter must provide greater luck so that things left undone do not become a source of harm. With Jupiter, there's a greater sense of understanding and contentment. The understanding that all my action is me building towards this experience of what's supposed to come. Every performance is just a rehearsal for the next one. Jupiter, the eternal performer. And if you don't have this contentment with which to accept the difficulties that having an ineffective Mars will bring, then you'll be much more skewed. It's Jupiter that is at the root of our compulsion to express ourselves in a satisfying, logical way where we really can manifest some good work. In order for us to know in ourselves how to best apply our logic and our skills, and what is the most meaningful way for us to apply those skills, we need to understand and have the experience of the understanding of ourselves and how we can best effectively apply that knowledge that we see through Mars. When Pluto is an aspect to Jupiter, we are obstructed in our ability to hear the reality around us. It doesn't necessarily mean that our ear physically, the organ of hearing, is obstructed, but it means that our consciousness of hearing the bullets of our immediate reality, and also the luck, an opportunity of what's around, what's the word, what's the high thing, is really, Jupiter is something that you're gonna listen to. Jupiter is something, wherever your Jupiter is in your chart, it shows what you're interested in listening to, what you're interested in getting an expansive expression and opinion on. When Pluto is an aspect to Jupiter, this capacity is choked. And when it's choked, when you go deaf, what happens is that you become dumb and mute. You smash your head Mars-wise against the material world until your consciousness allows yourself to start listening. In the same way that I've said in the Venus video, what will happen is that you'll eat 3/4 of a jar of mud to get at 1/4 of a jar of water. You'll throw yourself into meaningless experiences because you're holding on to one idea of freedom, one idea of philosophy, and people will hit you with confrontations through sound. And you can use your sight all you want to try and understand and conceptualize and categorize, but people will sense that you're just throwing words out here and not having an essential root of meaning, and you will probably be deeply embarrassed by that. This is probably an emotional compulsion that Pluto gives. So, with all that being said, now we can delve into our reading today. This is going to be a reading of Pluto, The Evolutionary Journey of the Soul by Jeffrey Wolf Green. I hope you guys enjoyed my rendition. Now we're going to get into the good stuff. This is Pluto, an aspect to Jupiter. What happens when Pluto is expanding and amplifying? Again, what we're looking for here is Pluto with Jupiter brings an attachment to the ideal, an attachment to the map. So much of an attachment to the map that you ignore the territory that's right in front of you. You have an idea, a conception of how reality ought to be, and you will only accept hearing things which fortify the concept of life that you've emotionally attached yourself to. You have an emotional, passionate attachment to this or that limit or ceiling of reality, and you're comfortable there. A deep metaphor for the personality expressed here is Plato's cave, where the person is in the cave. It's a dark cave, and there's a fire behind the person, and the fire creates shadows on the walls, and the person is down in this cave, and they start making myths. They start saying, oh yes, this is dawn. When dawn happens, the shadow people bring me food, and those are my gods, and I can't see outside of this reality. And then someone comes along and grabs that person in the cave and throws them outside, and they'll be blinded by the light, and they'll see humans, and it'll be the most grotesque thing, and they'll see themselves, and they're like, I can't believe this. Put me back in my ignorance. Put me back in the cave. I don't want to see. I don't want to see this higher ceiling of reality. But it will come. You will get thrown by the foot, and Pluto, big Uncle Pluto, is going to come grab you by the leg and hurl you carelessly, mindlessly, into new worlds of conception that are probably painful, probably things that you don't want to hear, until the point where the sound of your truth, the sound of the pain that your limited conception is putting you through, will deafen you. And all you will want to do is get out of the deafening sound of your limited reality. And this is when the true guru, will slip through the Plutonian slipstream and manifest in the opposite of this, which is a powerful expression of Jupiter, a powerful, useful Plutonian evolutionary expression of Jupiter. Of course, each person will have different evolutionary stages of this idea, but it will always come down to you learning to be dispassionate and detached from how you conceive of human life and organize yourself to the knowledge, the cosmological laws that make people the best that they can be. Whether you'll tell other people how to be, whether you'll be discerning about how you ought to be, or the opposite case, whether you'll completely ignore your own sense of evolution until it hits you in the head. This is what we're learning with Pluto in aspect to Jupiter. Now, again, I've really given myself a little bit long of an intro on this video. I hope you guys don't mind, but being a little bit Jupiterian, letting my Sagittarius moon come through. But now we're going to cinch it together. This is Pluto in aspect to Jupiter by Jeffrey Wolf Green. Let's have me stop blabbering and actually get into it. In general, Jupiter-Pluto aspects promote an emotionally intense need to develop the intuitive dynamic or sixth sense that is innate to all of us. These individuals have become aware of the larger social universal forces that constitute the totality of creation and have desired to understand the underlying natural principles or laws that are the foundation of creation. By developing an understanding of these natural laws or principles, these individuals have attempted to understand their own sense of personal identity, of individuality, their own natural laws as connected to these universal laws. These individuals are not concerned about intellectual opinions or collecting information, facts, and data for their own sake. Rather, they have been and will be concerned about developing broad, generalized, and abstract concepts through which to explain these facts or details. In order to develop or actualize this need and desire, these individuals have been learning how to let themselves become absorbed within the natural, universal, and social forces that surround and permeate them. That might mean going through a nature forest and seeing the plants, the flowers, the beauty of the goddess divine, or that might mean seeing the face of humanity expressed in a MDMA ecstasy rave at 3 a.m. in the morning in Toronto on a Tuesday night. Pluto and Jupiter can very much mean either of these sorts of things. Through this process of absorption in social and natural forces, a natural silence or stillness manifests itself internally that allows for a transformation of the limitations in the intellectual function described by Mercury, the rational. Mars and Mercury kind of work together with this rational reasoning. Mars is the instinct to experience a logical use of its power in its reasoning mind. Mercury is the ability to conceptualize language and communicate and understand language figures for the logic applied through Mars. So, Jupiter's silence or stillness, its internal stillness that is being developed lifetime after lifetime through this Pluto dance. A stillness is developed that allows for the transformation of the limitations of language and mental constructs, which Mercury represents. Mercury represents the ability, power, and need to intellectually order and empirically, logically connect life or reality on the physical plane, to understand it from a mental conceptual sense. Mercury is concerned about physical laws, while Jupiter is concerned with the metaphysical or cosmological laws. And of course, these metaphysical and cosmological laws are the basis for physical laws that are the world of Mercury, physics. So, by allowing for an absorption to occur, these individuals can attune themselves to the natural, cosmological, or metaphysical laws that are the basis of reality in a generalized sense. In this way, the intuitive dynamic has been developed. These individuals will be naturally intuitive coming into this life, for better or worse. They will naturally think in conceptual or abstract, even surreal terms. The power of absorption promotes the development of intuition, which is a good, strong, powerful thing when this spins in the correct way, as we can see why. If you allow yourself to become entranced by something, you can absorb deep, symbolic, under-ebbing values and symbols related to that thing, if your mind can open itself in that way. Intuition leads to the condition of just knowing what they know without knowing how they know it. This knowing, this etheric, psychic visualizing, is not a product of deductive or analytical thinking, but it simply occurs through pondering or speculating upon a question, problem, or the nature of things. By asking, pondering, or speculating in this way, a natural absorption and linkage to the larger cosmological forces allows for the answer to come of itself. The absorption promotes an alchemical fusion through which the individual's consciousness is expanded by the natural cosmic forces that regulate the metaphysical laws themselves. In essence, these individuals know what they know in abstract and conceptual forms, in terms. Frustration can be experienced by many of these individuals as they attempt to find the words, the Mercury, that adequately capture or reflect that which they know. The frustration occurs when they attempt to communicate their knowledge to others. And the funny thing is that even if you've got a good Mercury, having a bad Jupiter is what's being obstructed here. You could be a fine communicator, but it's the emotional embarrassment of what you're thinking about that is the emotional embarrassment of reaching into these places where you know you can. This is what's at play here. Even if you have a good Mercury, you're still going to be gunked up when it comes to your expressing your truth as you understand it. Having the best Mercury in the world is not going to stop this. You could be a great businessman who thinks, wonderfully about physical laws and all these things, but having Pluto conjunct Jupiter or an aspect of Jupiter might give you some internal blockages of subjective fulfillment and even philosophical meaning. It's not an uncommon... So in any case, these people are frustrated by their internal dialogue and having an internal dialogue and with communication of it. They have misty insights of truth, but then it comes and then it goes in a flash and then it's gone, and then people just look at them like they're this idiot. It's not an uncommon experience for these individuals to communicate their knowledge to others and for it not to come through. And also for these individuals to talk over the heads of other people. They rarely do this deliberately, although many people with Jupiter and Pluto aspects are accused of talking over people's heads. And sometimes they babble without even really going anywhere. They just, this is what my reality is. You know? People with really bunged up Jupiters are especially going to do this kind of stupid, instinctive gripping on what is obviously a lower shelf of intellect for everybody in the group. And they know it, but they just hold on to it. Many others in this camp may not have the ability to interpret correctly what they are trying to communicate. Yet, the transmission of this kind of intuitive knowledge can promote an understanding in others of what is being said without knowing how they understand it. And, in truth, Jupiter-Pluto individuals can spark intuitive development in others by them doing that. You know, it's this funny situation where a Pluto-Jupiter person says, wow, that cloud is really dark and gives me heavy emotional vibes. And if there's like 5 other people in the group, they'll be like, what are you talking? It's a cloud. What are you talking about? But if even one person goes, oh yeah, I kind of see what you mean there. It looks like there's this aesthetic aura of darkness behind it. And it's like, yeah. And as long as one person gets that, then the other 4 people in the group are going to go, maybe there is something there. And some of them might just be like, screw you guys are dumb. It's a cloud. But if you can get, the fact that you can, if you're correct, and there is truly some semblance of that surreal emotion in this unemotional object, which is just inanimate and has no sense of its own, no intrinsic emotional qualities, but you can read emotional qualities in it, and that's true, and there is those qualities in there. This is the depth of an artist, where other people will go, I get it. And you can help people bring out this intuition so long as you are getting a grip on this thing where you can happily and joyously play on this idea. Is it? What does it really mean, man? And if you can enjoy that, then you can help spark intuition and metaphysical sixth senses in other people. Now, for some, the frustration of not being able to find the adequate words to communicate what they know leads to alienation and withdrawal from philosophical and intellectual interactions with others. This is the 2 extremes: overemphasis and underemphasis with Pluto. Over-attachment and no attachment, no engagement. Over-attachment, no engagement. Over-attachment to laws and precepts, and then someone comes along and confronts you and says, you are thinking about this way too hard, and here's why. You just got schooled, son. And a bunch of your friends around like, oh, you thought you were right, but now you're wrong. And now you're like, oh my God, I'm never going to hold on to any intellectual idea ever again. And then this is the holding on passionately, disengaging entirely. Holding on passionately, disengaging entirely. This is Pluto's rhythm. Pluto's venomous, acidy rhythm. Some individuals will even develop an attitude of philosophical and intellectual superiority when they repeatedly find that others cannot comprehend what they are trying to say. Some will develop an attitude of inferiority for the same reasons. Superiority promotes the need to convert others to one's own point of view. Inferiority promotes the need to learn even more thoroughly what one is attempting to understand in order to communicate what they intuitively know to be true. In almost all these cases, these individuals will experience philosophical and intellectual confrontations with themselves and others. Confrontations must occur for the following reasons. Number 1, to learn that their understanding of the natural, metaphysical, or cosmological laws is relative or limited in some way, essentially, to your reality. Because the sound, the mantras, the knowledge only means something to you, because that's when knowledge becomes self-knowledge, and that's when it becomes true and meaning and eternal. Number 2 is to learn how to communicate in language that which is understandable and intelligible to most people. Again, Mercury is not going to help you with that. Mercury just knows about physics and stuff like that, and business and economy. Jupiter here is learning how to communicate in universal languages. And that's why even Jupiter people can be good grammarians and good at language, because they're trying to find universal ways to express universal things. Now, relative to the emotional power of Pluto, these individuals can forcefully communicate their beliefs and knowledge in a way that is often spellbinding in effect, for better or worse. Because they've developed their intuitive skills to tap into the natural laws that govern life, they will relate everything to those bottom line principles, truths, or laws as well. These principles can be quite fixed and rigid in a Plutonian obsessive-compulsive way. And if it's based on this, then how true does it really feel? And if it does, there's an emotional component, and you feel that you're gripping on it because there's an emotional component, your intuition knows that. It can be a very frustrating situation. So these principles are fixedly held to, and they're rigid in a Plutonian way. And these bottom line theories, ideologies, dogmas correlate to and are the basis for this individual's deep inner sense of emotional security. Pluto. These relatively fixed bottom line principles and convictions create philosophical limitations in most of these individuals. It's not that these philosophical principles or beliefs are wrong. In most cases, they're right, and there's a definite element of psychedelic, Plutonian, subterranean understanding of something there. So in most cases, they're right. The limitation is that these individuals do not always realize that there are other ways of interpreting or applying those laws and principles. The limitation can also derive from the fact that other natural laws or principles exist of which the individual has not yet become aware. Herein lies the need for confrontations in order to enforce the ongoing evolutionary purpose of eliminating or transforming those limitations so that growth and intuitive expansion can continue. Confrontations are necessary to teach these individuals how to communicate in a language that is understandable. Jupiter-Pluto aspects do promote natural teaching skills, especially when Jupiter is well placed. Jupiter correlates to the wisdom or knowledge that we acquire as a result of our experiences throughout our lifetimes. Our experiences. It's like the difference between a musician who teaches you by rote knowledge and understanding. Again, more of that Mars and Mercury, sort of like, just hit the keys this way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now do it again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now hit this sequence of keys this way. 1, 2, 3. Wrong note. Try again. All over. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that rote memorization is not the same as what Jupiter does. Alan Watts gives a good explanation of Jupiter, the way Jupiter teaches, where his teacher Alan Watts' teacher of piano, said, you can put your hands over the piano, now just let them drop. See, the gravity, the weight of your hands can allow it to fall. You don't have to hit the piano. Now, the point here is that you can enjoy it. Now, here's a little thing that you can do. The teacher said, do it in your own time. Just, play the notes, feel them out. Feel how you would like to express them. Let your hands fall on the piano. Now, do it in a rhythm and enjoy it. You can mess up. If you've messed up, just keep going. Don't start over. Just let yourself experience the flow of what the music is. It's this heartfelt center that makes Jupiter a good teacher because, again, it's not about the sight. It's not about getting it done. It's about enjoying what you are, from which getting it done will do itself and unfold itself. So, sorry, I gotta stop losing my spot. Yeah. So, confrontations will be necessary to teach these individuals how to communicate in a language that is understandable. And Jupiter-Pluto aspects promote natural teaching skills because of this heart-centered, sound-based, real-lived experience of what we're talking about. The territory, not just the map. How to learn something best. Not just learning something most efficiently, but most effectively. Jupiter correlates to the wisdom or knowledge that we acquire as a result of our experiences throughout our lifetimes. In India, the planet Jupiter is called Guru, Jupiter, teacher. Relative to evolutionary capacity and karmic conditions, those with Jupiter-Pluto aspects have wisdom to share with others in some way. Yet, until they learn how to communicate in a way that can be grasped and accepted by most, this wisdom will go unheard or unaccepted. That's why it's so important for these people to just faithfully talk about, excitedly, optimistically about all the things that could possibly be. Because then they start to get it in their experience, and they are not just hiding from the experience of what they're talking about. They're not just flapping their gab. Jupiter also correlates to the growth principle in all of us. Thus, these individuals have a particular need and desire to expand beyond the limitations of an imposed religious or philosophical orientation defined by their culture. Their culture, their family, or themselves. Because the Jupiter-Pluto aspect, from an evolutionary point of view, desires to know the whole truth. These individuals need to challenge the limitations of any doctrine that denies or restricts the individual's right to experience or understand more, or doctrines that deny the relevancy or legitimacy of other philosophical, metaphysical, or religious systems. This challenge can take the form of covert rejection or overt attacks delivered or stated in varying degrees of intensity. It's a funny thing because Pluto and Jupiter people can be a big mouthpiece for how humans ought to organize themselves. It's the people who get themselves mixed up with debates like, for example, pro-life abortion versus anti-abortion. People who get themselves involved with that kind of thing could very well have Pluto in aspect to Jupiter because they need to experience this exploring at the level of truth and battle it at that level so that they can understand for themselves whether this is a thing or not. And they might overtly say that this sect is wrong. And sometimes that's a good thing. Politics is riddled with Jupiterian energy for this reason. Some people use Pluto's swing and sway to move their religious and ideal precepts, for better or worse. The problem is, and the tricky part is that, Pluto can be an aspect to Jupiter in a positive way, and we need those people to positively emotionally sway the crowd, because those with Pluto in ill aspect to Jupiter, with ill malefic aspects to Jupiter or Pluto with this kind of aspect, will produce this emotional, spellbinding effect upon the masses. And the masses will listen, and this will unfold the new precept of how the world is going to deal with the ethic of this or that thing. Gay marriage, LGBT, the pro-life versus anti-abortion debate, these kinds of things. Whatever's the truth in each of those debates, we need people with positive Pluto, Jupiter aspects to be the mouthpiece for the positive side of truth and sacrifice for that truth. As well, in order to perpetuate the truth in this positive way. Otherwise, those who have ill malefic aspects in this Jupiter-Pluto sense will provide the other side and express their karma, experience the negative side of this Plutonian karma by carrying a bad agenda. And that's part of them working it out. That's their journey. This is the nature of politics and the limited frame of the human mind trying to deal with the infinite frame of knowledge, self-realization, and sixth sense metaphysical wisdom. But I digress. So, they can challenge other religious precepts, other philosophical precepts, other political precepts that will challenge them hard in varying degrees of intensity with this aspect. On the other hand, many Jupiter-Pluto people will themselves reject or deny other philosophical points of view because of their own emotional security needs. When confronted, they will defend and maintain their most cherished principles because of the emotional power of their beliefs, which are the basis of their security and sense of personal identity. In other words, they will use their rigid and fixed beliefs not only to defend themselves against external challenges, but also to rationalize philosophically the legitimacy of their defense. Could even get themselves into a rut and try to philosophize about that. It's the kind of person who can be like, take up Taoism. I believe Jack Kerouac was almost this type of person who took on the philosophy of Taoism, of nature, of the body, and of a Venusian sense of enjoying the pleasures of the body, and found himself becoming an alcoholic. People were isolating themselves from him, and he disappeared from his close relations, and he kind of had this philosophical idea that, like, this is my freedom that I've found. And he held on to it in an emotional way. I don't know if Jack Kerouac had Pluto an aspect of Jupiter. I'd like to know, though. But I digress. Living and dying upon their beliefs and principles, these people will put down any system or point of view other than their own, and they will not hear anything outside of their own narrative, their conceptual narrative. These people may be leaders or followers of religious or philosophical sects that espouse the attitude of we are right and they are wrong. The same attitude can manifest itself in individuals who do not belong to any formal organization or sect, individuals who stand alone within their philosophical smugness, rejecting all who do not agree with them. In essence, those with Jupiter-Pluto aspects will intuitively realize and identify natural laws that are the basis of the reality that we all share on Earth. In so doing, they can develop a belief system based on these laws or principles and can conduct their lives in conformity to them. Most such individuals will have strong convictions and principles, morals, that not only dictate their own actions, but also influence how they understand and interpret life and reality around them. Now here, Jeffrey Wolf gives us a great little dissertation on philosophy and Jupiter in general. He says, I think most of us would agree that there are many and varied ways to understand and interpret the phenomena of life. Atheism, Buddhism, Christianity, Vedanta, Taoism, existentialism, nihilism, and so forth are all ways of understanding or relating to life in a larger way. Whatever path Jupiter-Pluto individuals are born into or are drawn to is based on their desires and karmic and evolutionary needs or conditions. Sorry, I should say it again. So, whatever path the Jupiter-Pluto individual is born into, or whatever they're drawn to, it's based on their desires and their own karmic and evolutionary needs or conditions. Again, desires determine what we think we need. What we think we need determines the choices and actions we make to fulfill those desires. What we desire also determines what we value at any particular time. Our values and desires determine how we will intuitively and philosophically orient ourselves to life, and conditions what our beliefs have been and will be. Values. The challenge for individuals with Pluto-Jupiter aspects is to realize that each person's beliefs, convictions, and principles reflect personal truths in relation to their needs, desires, and values, just as the Pluto-Jupiter person's beliefs are based on the same principle. Each person is oriented to reality in ways that are conditioned by their karmic and evolutionary development. If an individual's desires, values, and needs dictate an atheistic philosophical orientation, for example, then his or her intuition will tap into the natural laws, principles, and truths regarding the nature and consequences of atheism. Another person's desires, values, and karmic and evolutionary needs would lead to some other philosophical orientation. Who's right and who's wrong? Both are right relative to their needs, knowledge, self-realization. Both are right relative to their needs, desires, and values. With this realization, Jupiter-Pluto individuals can eliminate any defensive need to put down any other philosophical or religious orientation that does not conform to their own. They can learn how to teach, not to indoctrinate, and they can learn how to accept teaching from others. In this way, for the search for the whole truth will unerringly and truly continue. I heard a wonderful line in a YouTube comment of all places while I was watching a video the other day, and what it said was, it was in relation to Hinduism. What it says is that Hinduism does not tell or does not guide or force anybody it does not tell anybody to do anything or how to live their lives. It gives us narratives, teachings, and stories for us all to learn. And that is a understanding of an ideology that ought to be applied to all ideologies, because all ideologies are free knowledge, and the rightness of that knowledge relates somehow, finally, to the individual as well as to the eternal, esoteric, occult symbology of chakras, auras, human evolution, psychology, wisdom. There is wisdom. There are universal precepts and truths. But how to apply those formulas to me might be different for how to apply those formulas to you. This is the game that you would be lucky to learn as somebody with Pluto and Jupiter. Because once you get a hold of this, once you get conked on the head by walking around in the darkness of your own closed ear reality, then you will see how lovely it is to burst open the gates and be with everybody else, trying to get in tune with your intuition, and bringing that light of that joyous spontaneous illumination to those around you, or at least the desire, transmuting the desire within to be internalized, to seek the deeper truth and knowledge that is within you and that is eternal, and that can be eternally applied through the many forms and variances that we see as knowledge of Earth and those around us. Beautiful thing to share in, folks. Now, this has been my longest Pluto aspecting a planet video. I hope it wasn't too long-winded. As I said, it was very Jupiter. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I really like doing these things with you guys. I'm Dustin Cormier. This is How to Rock Astrology. Thanks for watching. If you dug it, feel free to drop a like. Feel free to leave me a comment. Say what you think. Let me know if you thought it was cool. And feel free to subscribe, because I've always got more stuff coming through if you enjoyed how I do my whole thing. Lots happening right now, especially because I'm kind of inside the house because it's December 2020 COVID times, and I'm squashing out lots of videos. So keep your eyes peeled, folks. I really hope you enjoyed this, and I hope to see you again. Thanks for watching.